The Book of Destiny. Translation of Kitab-ul-Taqdeer. Author: Ghulam Ahmed Parwez. Translated by Dr. Ejaz Rasool. Glasgow, UK. ISBN number 9798884207042. 8 Chapter 8, If, Then. In the Quran, we have explained at the beginning that the definition of Allah is if, then, always. In other words, if you do this, or do it like this, then its consequence will be such and such, and whenever and wherever you do this, its consequence will always be the same. Whichever command, ideology, formula, or algorithm meets these conditions, it will be called a law. 8.1 Judicial Laws. There are three known forms of law in the world. First, judicial law. For example, if you steal, then you will be punished with up to 3 years imprisonment and a fine of 1,000 rupees. In this law you will notice that there is no intrinsic connection between the deed, theft, and its consequence, imprisonment or fine. In the code of laws of a country, theft is declared to be a crime and the order for punishment of this crime is issued from the direction of the court. If theft was not declared to be a crime according to the code of laws of a country, or the one who commits theft could not be brought within the grasp of the judicial machinery, then there would be no consequence to this act of theft. In other words, the consequence of a deed is not embedded within the judicial laws, it is levied from the outside. This is the reason that these laws do not exist in their own right from the beginning, they are legislated. Any country can legislate whatever kinds of laws it wishes, and whenever it wishes it can change or amend them. This is the same condition for communal laws and codes. That is, those pertaining to society. 8.2 Physical Laws. Now let us examine the other category of laws which are called physical laws, or the laws of nature. For example, this law that if put your finger into fire, it will become burnt. Note that in this the consequence of this action is inbuilt within the deed itself, it has not been imposed from somewhere outside. It is not the case that if a country passes this law that in our land fire will not burn a finger, then fire will stop burning it. Or that some individual puts his finger into fire in such a place where no one can see him, and so at that time his finger will not become burnt. These are those laws on which the definition of law as mentioned above is precisely and fully applicable. These laws exist in their own right. They are not devised by man, and are also immutable. 8.3 Permanent Values. Now we come to the third category of laws. For example, if you do not help the needy, you will become destroyed. It is obvious that though this law meets the condition of if, and, then, it neither comes within the domain of judicial or communal laws, nor within the domain of the physical laws of nature. These are called the divine permanent values because they are also immutable and are not devised by human beings but are established by Allah, and are bestowed by Him through Wahi. There is a dual outcome which becomes established through these laws. Firstly, that the communal life of man becomes balanced by acting according to them, and secondly, that the self-personality of individuals become developed. Only the individual who acknowledges the existence of the human self can have conviction in the truth of these values. It is apparent from this that in order to act according to these values, possession of Iman is fundamental. That is, conviction in the human self and in the permanent values bestowed via the Wahi of Allah. The Quran has also highlighted the communal aspect of these laws and also that aspect which is linked to the human self. For example, it has declared zina, adultery and fornication, to be a transgression of the permanent values, and on the one hand calling it a crime in the court of law, has proposed a punishment for it, and together with this has also stated that weakness becomes created as a result of this in the human self. 25. 68. 8.4 Kitab and Hikmat. The Book and Wisdom. In the Quran, Kitab and Hikmat are both declared as being sent down from the direction of Allah. Kitab is the if part of the law and Hikmat is its then. If there is not a then in an order, then that order cannot acquire the status of a law. In the communal world, when lawlessness becomes widespread in some country, then even though if is still present at its place, its then disappears. For example, the law in it was that if you take a bribe, then you will be fired from the job. But what happens in lawlessness is that people take bribes freely but are not dismissed from their jobs, they do not receive the punishment for this crime. 8.5 Difference between Deen and religion. Madhab. In the same way, when Deen descends to the level of religion, then the laws in it adopt the form of such commands to which obedience is considered to be essential, but no tangible outcome of these comes before us. Obedience to them is induced by announcing that the pleasure of Allah is obtained through this, and that He becomes displeased by disobedience to them. But in Deen, commands are established in the form of laws. By obeying them a defined outcome is established, which appears in a tangible form in both this world, and will also appear in the hereafter. This is what is meant by Kitab and Hikmat. Together with Kitab, Hikmat is also made clear so that we can keep checking concurrently whether the command is being acted upon correctly or not. If, by complying with this command, that outcome is becoming established which was described, then it is being followed correctly. If that outcome is not materializing, then we need to stop and see where we are going wrong. This is not the situation in religion. In this, man remains absorbed in his own contented belief, complacency, and does not assess whether the outcome of his action is right or wrong. This is because this reality is simply not before him that any tangible outcome can appear by obeying this command. It is obvious that if you act according to some formula and its defined outcome is not established, but despite this you keep on acting in the same way, then all your efforts will go to waste. The Quran calls this the wasting of deeds. 217. That is, their deeds were wasted, their efforts remained fruitless. In Deen, every effort which is made according to the law bears fruit, in religion it goes to waste. Whatever is stated above, we have noted it in parts earlier as well. But at this place it was felt necessary to reiterate it for another purpose. That purpose is that if the question of if only arises for the one who is the possessor of choice and intent, then the question of if simply does not arise for the one who is constrained. If you do this, then its outcome will be this. The meaning of this is that whoever is being addressed has the choice that if he wishes he can do this, and if he wishes he does not have to do this. It can only be said to someone with eyes that if you keep your eyes on the path when walking, you will save yourself from falling into a ditch. It cannot be said to a blind man that if you keep your eyes on the path then you will not fall into a ditch. Hence, for the Quran to say to human beings that if you do it like this, then this will be the consequence, proclaims man as being the possessor of choice and intent, not as being constrained. In this connection, the Quran has generally used the if, then, in a fa sequence, and at some places has also stated that you are told to do it like this, so that la alakum. In both cases the purpose is the same. At this point we wish to illustrate the wisdom of the use of if, then by presenting a few laws from the Quran, from which it will become clear that man is possessor of choice in his actions. 8.6 A few examples from the Quran. 1. The essential consequence of Iman and Salih deeds is the life of paradise, that is, if you accept Iman and do Salih deeds, then its outcome will be the life of Jannat. 2. 25. 2. If you follow our teachings, then there will be no fear and grief. Qaf and Huzn. 2. 38. If you keep your wealth openly available in the path of Allah, then there will be no fear and grief. 2. 262, 2. 274, 2. 277, 6. 48, 46. 13. 3. If you accept some parts of the book, code of laws, and reject some parts, then you will be humiliated and ruined in this world and will suffer a severe chastisement in the hereafter. 2. 85. 4. If these people had accepted Iman and acquired taqwa, then they would have received an excellent recompense. 2. 103. 5. If you keep my laws before you and do not ignore them, then I will add an increase in your eminence and loftiness. 2. 152. 6. If these people of the book had accepted Iman in the Quran, then it would have been better for them. 3. 110. 7. If you become Momin, then you will remain in authority over all. 3. 139. 8. If you are killed in the path of Allah, or you die, then protection and rahmat will be bestowed on you from the direction of Allah. 3. 157. 9. If you remain in receipt of Allah's help, then no one will be able to overpower you. 3. 160. But Allah's help is only available to the one who stands up in support of Deen. 22. 40, 47. 7. 10. If you accept Iman and acquire taqwa, then there is a supreme reward for you. 3. 179. 11. If you steer away from major errors, fundamental flaws, then your imbalances will be removed. 4. 31. 12. If these people of the book had accepted Iman and acquired taqwa, then we would have removed the imbalances in their life. 5. 65. If they had continued to obey the wahi of Allah, then they would have kept receiving the means of sustenance from the heavens and the earth. 5. 66. The doors of the bounties of the heavens and earth would have opened for them. 7. 96. 13. The one who accepts Iman and then does not include injustice, zulm, with his Iman acquires peace and receives guidance towards expansive paths. 6. 83. 14. If you adopt taqwa, then you will achieve a life of distinction. 8. 29. 15. If 20 mujahideen among you remain firm-footed, then you will overwhelm 200, this will occur in that situation where you are on an equal footing with the opponents with regard to the means and resources for war and battle. If there is a deficiency in this respect in your case, even then you will overcome twice your number. 8. 65 to 66. 16. Through Iman and taqwa glad tidings are received both in this life and the hereafter. This is the immutable law of Allah in which there will not be any change. 10. 63 to 64. 17. Whoever strives on our path, we will light up many pathways for him for the achievement of the aim. 29. 69. 18. Whoever remains firm-footed with Iman, Malaika will descend upon him who will give him glad tidings that there will not be any kind of fear and grief for him both in this world and in the hereafter. 41. 30 to 31. 19. Through Iman and Salih deeds, power in the land is achieved, that is government and estate is acquired in this world. 24. 55. 20. If you turn away from the laws of Allah, then another nation will take your place. 9. 39, 47. 38. 21. Whoever turns away from our laws, his sustenance will be narrowed down. 20. 124. 22. If you utilize the divine bounties, Na'ima, according to his laws, do shukr, then there will be an increase in our bounties. If you block the bounties of life, do kafr, then you will become trapped in punishment. 14. 7. 23. whoever gives to others and pursues taqwa, the pathways of his life will become easier. 92. 5-7. 24. Stay steadfast, maintain mutual discipline and control, pursue taqwa so that you can succeed. 3. 200. 25. Bani Israel were held accountable through the punishment of disgrace and ruin. This happened because they adopted rebellion against the laws of Allah. 3. 112. By reflecting on these examples, this reality will become crystal clear before us that Allah has kept two possibilities before man, and has stated to him that you can adopt whichever path you wish between these two, but understand this much, that if you adopt this path then this will be the consequence, and if you adopt that path then its outcome will be that one. This is what is called an immutable law, and the establishment of this law is called Taqdeer, that is, the natural consequence of a human deed according to the law of Allah. We had stated earlier that a command which is permanent, that is, there is no change made in it, acquires the shape of a law. Now this should be added to it that, when Allah gives a command on some matter on a permanent basis and together with this also states that this will be its outcome, then this command will be called an immutable law. Islam is deen, and in deen laws are provided. The meaning of the word deen itself is also law. The Quran is the final book of Allah. Hence there is now no question of any change in the commands given in it, and it has also been noted in it what the outcome of acting in accordance with these commands will be. Therefore the Quran is the divine code of laws. 9. Chapter 9, How did this happen? Cast another glance at the verses of the Quran which have appeared before you in the previous pages and see whether any kind of doubt or suspicion, skepticism or confusion remains in this matter, or the possibility of even the slightest error in understanding that 1. The system of the universe is busy functioning according to the established laws of Allah. 2. Man is possessor of choice and intent and is responsible for his decisions and his deeds. At every crossroad in life both the right and the wrong paths are clearly present before him, and he possesses the choice that he can select whichever path he wishes. Whichever path he treads on, its consequences will appear before him. This is called the law of requital, which is permanent and immutable. What you sow, so shall you reap is the fundamental principle of life. 9.1 Are prevalent beliefs. Keep these realities to one side in your mind, and on the other side witness what you have been hearing since your childhood in your homes, in the streets, in the bazaars, in the mosques, in the gatherings of respected scholars, and in the congregations of revered Sufis, and what you have been reading in the tafsir of the Quran, the collections of a hadith, the books of past imams, and in the literature of poets and the tales of the elders, that not a leaf in the world can move without the command of Allah. Man can do nothing without the command of Allah. Whatever takes place here is due to the will of Allah, man cannot interfere in it in any way. Whatever is going to occur in his life, it is all written down prior to his birth in his Taqdeer, and no one can erase the slate of Taqdeer. No one can change destiny. Muqaddar. Allah is omnipotent, he can do whatever he wishes. No one dare say anything against his command. He can give limitless sustenance to whoever he wishes, and he can give restricted risk to whoever he wishes. He can make whoever he wishes rich, and he can make whoever he wishes poor and deprived. He can bestow status on whomever he wishes, and can impart humiliation on whomever he wishes. If he wishes, he can make kings paupers, and if he wishes he can place a royal crown on the heads of beggars. Sickness and health, life and death, all are within his control and authority. Human planning can do nothing in this. Hence, man should not allow even the slightest complaint to arise in his heart against his will. Whatever transpires, he should remain content and grateful. On this, the more an individual remains reconciled to his will, the more he will be counted as being among the courtiers of the divine court. This is now the teaching of Islam, and these are the beliefs of Muslims. You will surely be astonished how these beliefs became prevalent among Muslims in opposition to such clear and transparent teaching of the Quran, and became prevalent in such a way that they transformed into actual deen themselves, and became ingrained with such intensity in the depths of the subconscious that even if some fleeting thought arises in opposition to these at any moment in time in someone's heart, he begins to tremble, thinking that who knows how big a sin has been committed due to this. And if an individual brings even a word on his lips against these beliefs, then an alarm is raised that he is an apostate, an atheist, a denier of the omnipotence of Allah, a materialist, and who knows what else. Inevitably this matter will be seen as a reason for great incredulity and a cause for immense astonishment as to how this transformation became created in the fundamental teaching of Islam, and how such a perplexing revolution entered our beliefs. And this is despite the fact that the Book of Allah is present with us in such a way that no change has occurred in even a single word or punctuation mark in it. And its recitation is done day and night, morning and evening, darus are presented regarding it, tafsir are written about it. Just ponder, is this not the place where we need to halt, and with profound patience and calmness, intense reflection and reasoning, analyze how did this happen? When did it happen? Why did it happen? And is there any possibility of rectification of this or not? 9.2 Former discourses on Ilm al-Kalam are meaningless. There has been so much written around the issue of Taqdeer amongst us that perhaps not even a fraction of this has been devoted to any other issue. Since this issue has been made a constituent of Iman, details of this will come later. Therefore it was not possible that a book is written about Islam and Taqdeer is not mentioned in it. Over and above being written about in passing, enormous, voluminous, dedicated tomes have been authored on this topic, but the skill of those who generate complications is such that the more they tried to resolve this issue, the more complex it continued to become. And the reason was that instead of carrying out analyses according to the Quran, they made it an abode of philosophical intricacies and intellectual sophistries, and discussed aspects which were outside of the Quran from the religious point of view. We feel that entering into a discussion about these details is non-productive. Not only because a ship is needed to travel this shoreless ocean, but also because if we present these before you, you will simply not be able to comprehend what their meaning is and what their connection with deen is. In light of the viewpoint with which we reflect on the issues of life today, knowledge about the Ilm al-Kalam of that era has now become obsolete and useless. It is obsolete, and for the modern day intellect it is complex, in fact also vague. For example, Imam Ibn Hazm Andalusi is counted as being amongst the renowned scholars of the past. He has carried out a detailed discussion under the topic of Qada and Qadar in his famous book, Al-Malal wa al-Nahal. This discourse begins with the following question and answer. These people, who are convinced about action through the possession of ability, have said that when this question is posed, does a kafir have the ability to accept this iman for which he has been commanded, or does he not have the ability for this? They replied that a kafir has the ability to exchange iman, that is, that he will not remain in kufr forever, but will cancel it and will replace it with iman. The answer which is essential for this is that he is apparently in possession of the ability due to his healthy body and absence of any limitations on the sum total of iman and kufr, while he remains a kafir, and until such a time that Allah helps him, he will remain without ability. When he is accorded help, his ability becomes completed, and then he acted. If it is said that in that case, he has then become possessor of this ability and become responsible for his actions, then we will reply, yes. Now just imagine that if this discussion, which is spread across hundreds of pages, is presented before you, what will you achieve from this? Amongst us discussions have taken place in a similar fashion on this issue. Endless books have been written along these very lines, and this is what is being taught in our religious institutions and establishments of higher learning. 9.3 History is untrustworthy. And now the question which remains is, who was responsible for initiating these new and against the Quran beliefs, and how did they become not only a constituent of Islam, but became declared as the origin and basis. Its connection is with history, and from the historical perspective. And on hearing this, you will certainly be taken aback, but it is a fact that our record about the initial era is very untrustworthy. This discussion is not related to the topic which we are viewing, hence we do not wish to enter into details about this at this point. Briefly, its reasons are as follows. 1. Our earliest written history, which is considered to be not only authentic, but in fact is viewed as Umm-ul-Tawarikh, the mother of histories, is the history by Imam Tabari, which has been concluded in 13 volumes. This history was recorded almost 300 years after the initial era, the time of Rasulullah, and that, 2. In this way that it was based not on some prior written record, but on oral narrations. In other words, Imam Tabari has written that I heard this version from so and so, who in turn heard it from so and so, and in this way this spoken series of narrations reached to the initial era. To what extent a history which is compiled in this fashion can be trustworthy is obvious. After this, whatever books on history there have been among us are based on the history by Tabari. This is why it is called Umm-ul-Tawarikh. 2. Only that history which is unbiased and compiled objectively can present events in their original colors. During the era in which our history was compiled, the Ummah had become divided into sects. Therefore during this era, not only history, but whatever was written was not able to remain untainted by sectarian beliefs and tribal prejudices and inclinations. In that era the issue of Taqdeer itself had also become a basis for sectarianism. This is the reason that Abu Zar Misri has said that it is hard today to determine who was the initial proponent of the doctrine of Jabr. In his words, it is very difficult to determine about a sect which acquires the form of a specific group, who its initial founder was. Hence, identifying the starting point of the sect is not an easy task. 3. This belief regarding the greatness and sanctity of forefathers was made commonplace among us, that to pass any criticism on whatever they had written, in fact, whatever is related towards them, is against their high stature, rather it is a severe insult to their honor and an unforgivable sin. Now it is obvious that the nation in which such beliefs are rife about these figures from the past, how can its history be examined with a critical eye, particularly when this kind of critique is declared to be even kufr and apostasy? The nation whose children are taught this lesson, that the mistakes of forefathers cannot be questioned, how can its past literature be sifted through the sieve of knowledge and reason? 9.4 The correct approach to history. These are the reasons on the basis of which our history cannot be declared to be trustworthy. As far as the eminent character of Rasulullah and the circumstances and details about his companions are concerned, for that we have the authority and evidence of the Book of Allah, the Quran, in whose truth and integrity we have iman. The part of our history which is related to that era can be evaluated in this way, that those events in history which are such that they go against the authority and evidence of the Quran, they are false and hence worthy of rejection, and those events which are in accordance with its authority and evidence, they can be considered as being correct and acceptable. But we do not possess any such criterion for the evaluation of history following this era. Because we have evidences present with us from the Quran about the issue of Taqdeer, we can therefore declare this much with certainty: which of those beliefs that were made widespread afterwards in relation to this are in accordance with the Quran and which are against it. 9.5 The doctrine of Jabr at the advent of Islam. The Quranic viewpoint about the issue of Taqdeer has appeared before us. We also obtain this evidence from the Quran itself, that during the period that the Quran was sent down, such people existed whose belief was that whatever takes place it is due to the will of Allah, man has no choice in this matter. It is noted in Surah Al-An'am, Mushrikeen will declare that if Allah had wished, then neither we nor our forefathers would have committed shirk, nor would we have declared anything haram. We are only doing all of this because Allah had wished it to be like this, What control do we have in it? 6. 148. The Quran has stated that these people falsify the truth and reality. In this connection, see verses 16, 35, 43, 20. In Surah Yasin it is stated, when they are told to spend their wealth to remove the hunger of those who are hungry, then those people who are kafir say to the mu'mineen that if it was the will of Allah that these people do not remain hungry, then He would have provided rizq to them Himself. It is evidently clear from their being hungry that Allah simply does not wish to provide them with rizq. Hence, how can we provide rizq to those whom Allah does not wish to provide with rizq? This would be tantamount to going against the will of Allah. 36. 47. The Quran declares that these people are immersed in a blatant state of misguidance. 9.6 Punishment due to the belief of Jabr. From these verses it is clear that at the time of Rasulullah such people existed who were convinced about the doctrine of Jabr. These were mushrikeen and kufr. The Quran refuted this belief of theirs, and together with this provided such positive teaching due to which the root of these kinds of beliefs was severed. In the light of the Quran, the issue of Taqdeer was solved with such ease that no further doubt or suspicion even remained in this regard, and no one required any kind of further elaboration. If any doubt arose anywhere about it, then this was immediately resolved. For example, it is noted in the hadith that a thief was brought before Caliph Umar, and he asked him, "Why did you steal?" He replied that, "This was merely the decision of Allah." At this Caliph Umar imposed hud on him and also added a punishment of lashes. When he was asked the reason for this double punishment, he said that the punishment for stealing is hud, and the lashes because he leveled a false accusation against Allah. Among Muslims, as long as the Quran remained the source and foundation of deen, the doctrine of Jabr was not able to embed among them. It is obvious that the ideology which the Quran explicitly declares as being shirk and kufr, how could it find a place among Muslims? But when the Quran disappeared from their sight, or was made to disappear, and that central authority, that is, the system of the state based on Risalat, no longer remained, which was responsible for keeping the beliefs and masalak of the Ummah bound within the shores of the Quran, then all kinds of non-Quranic beliefs and concepts kept becoming a part of Islam. Among these was also the issue of Taqdeer. In fact, it is stated that the very first sect which appeared within the Ummah on the basis of this belief was the Jabriya sect. And there was a particular reason for this. 9.7 The evidence of Harmzan. Before the advent of Islam, the Arab nation consisted mostly of tribes of desert dwellers and nomads who used to live life by herding goats and consuming dates. To their right and left were those empires of Persia and Rome, whose civilization and culture, power and glory, had been legendary for centuries. Evidence for the degree of disdain with which the inhabitants of Persia viewed these Arabs as being lowly can still be found today in the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi. These Arabs accepted a deen like Islam, and from this such a revolution arose in their hearts. An outlook that within a short period they became rulers of the vast and wide empire of Persia. Obviously, this was an unbearable shock for the Persians. They were defeated in the battlefield at the hands of Arabs and came under their control and authority. But the deep wound which was caused to their hearts as a result of this could not be healed for a very long time. As a result, the fire of revenge kept simmering in their hearts. They knew that the secret of this immense power of the Arabs was concealed in those concepts of life which the Quran had bestowed on them. After suffering defeat in the battlefield, when a governor of Persia, Harmzan, having been captured, was brought to Medina, Caliph Umar inquired from him that the Persians were that nation which considered it to be beneath them to even fight against the Arabs. And if the Arabs ever had a skirmish with them, then a tiny contingent of their army would cause the Arabs to flee. Why has it now happened that the whole nation of Persia has been so heavily defeated by a handful of Arabs? The answer which Harmzan gave is worthy of deep reflection. He said that the truth is that before this, when we used to have confrontations, the Arabs used to face the Persians alone, hence it was not at all difficult for us to overcome them. But in the confrontation which took place this time, the Persians were alone in this, but the Arabs also had their Allah with them. Who could fight against the combined might of these two? And so we were defeated. Now the Arabs also had their Allah with them. This was the real secret of the power of the Arabs, with which the Persians were very well acquainted. The meaning of being with Allah was that a transformation had taken place in the hearts of the Arabs due to this deen which their Allah had bestowed on them. As a result of this change in heart and vision, those revolutionary passions which arose in them, and that determination which was awakened in their hearts for the sake of their high and lofty aim in life to unflinchingly oppose every non-deen power in the world, even to the laying down of their lives, no nation in the world was able to compete with this. The Persians and Byzantines were all aware of this secret, hence their endeavor was to divert the Arabs away from these concepts of life which were the reality and basis of their successes and achievements. 9.8 The plot of Christians and Jews. A severe blow was also caused to the self-concocted religions of Judaism and Christianity due to the advent of Islam. Furthermore, due to the rising power of the Muslims, a tremor had appeared in the foundations of the powerful fortress of the Byzantine Empire, and Jews received an enforcement order to exit from the Arabian Peninsula. Hence, these nations were also not lagging behind the Persians in their vindictiveness against the Arabs. Their intentions were the same as those of the Persians, and the tactics to accomplish these aims were also the same as those which were in the minds of the Persians. In other words, by somehow or other alienating Muslims from the revolution-inducing concepts of life bestowed by the Quran, to introduce the same kind of tampering in their deen as the tampering which had taken place in their own religions. When Iqbal uses the term Ejaz as against Arab, from this he does not only mean the Persians, all non-Arab nations are included in it. And when he presents Arab Islam in opposition to Ajami Islam, then by Arab Islam he means that deen which was bestowed by the pure Quran. And by Ajami Islam is meant all those non-Quranic concepts which were borrowed from Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, etc., and made constituents of Islam. And in this way, this deen of Allah converted into that self-created religion of men which continues to be prevalent among us for centuries now. The beginning of this tampering occurred from Persia, and its first link in the chain was an alteration in the belief about Taqdeer. The foundation of Zoroastrianism was on the issue of khair and shar, hence the Persians knew very well what effect this belief has on the life of nations. They were well acquainted with this secret that a nation which holds this conviction that man writes his own destiny with his own hand and that his place among the ranks of nations in the world is defined by his doctrines of life, and his deeds and character are in accordance with these, then that nation becomes the possessor of immense powers. The technique to draw it away from these powers is to instill this belief in them that nothing transpires from the planning and deeds of man himself. The condition in which he is to live in the world is pre-decided in advance. Muqaddar, that is as per his taqdeer. And no individual can make any kind of alteration in this. Thus the beginning of the tampering in deen, Islam, was from this very issue. The foundation of the very first sect which appeared among Muslims on the basis of beliefs was on a mutual difference regarding the issue of taqdeer. This tale is interesting as well as extremely instructive. And acutely painful too. It is not a tale, it is a tragedy about its decline, it is grief about its state of ruin, it is an obituary about its demise. 9.9 The Asawara of Persia. In Persia there was a group of men of knowledge and intellect and a political class who were known as Asawara. Think of them as advisors to the Persian royals. Akazara. Just like the 9 viziers of Akbar. These aristocrats of the royal court used to be gifted with a bracelet of gold as a mark of distinction. This is why they were called Asawara. The meaning of al-sawar is that of a bracelet. In addition, the aim of this metaphor which has been described in the Quran regarding the inhabitants of paradise that they will be given gold bracelets to wear, is a reference to their lofty status of distinction. After the defeat of Persia, the Persian army in general and the Asawara in particular petitioned Sa'd bin Waqtas, the conqueror of Persia, that whatever entitlements are available to the Muslims, if these are also made available to us, then by accepting Islam we wish to settle down in Muslim habitations. This condition of theirs was accepted, and in this way these people settled in Kufa and Basra etc. Today, though we are not aware of the details of this reconciliation in view of which this permission was granted, when we look at the consequences and outcomes of this, then the conclusion towards which the mind is drawn is that this decision was not a wise one. The reason is very clear. As is well known, Persia was the home of a very ancient civilization due to which the artificialities of a wrong culture and the formalities of warped traditions had become a part of their life. The Malukiyat, the priesthood, and the capitalist system were flowing freely through the veins of their society like lifeblood. The basis of their religion was on Zoroastrian beliefs. Their wise men, particularly the Asawara, were experts in discussions and observations about matters relating to philosophy, logic, theology, and metaphysics, etc. In contrast to them were the Arabs, whose life was simple like the starkness of a desert, and whose intellect was unpolluted like the atmosphere of a jungle. They were neither acquainted with the machinations of the realm of politics, nor were they familiar with the minutiae of ontological issues, or the intricacies of philosophy and logic. The deen by obedience to which they had achieved a distinctive status in the world, that too was extremely pure, direct, and simple, a few clear and transparent concepts of life, and the power to action generated by them, this was their way of life and the basis of their sustenance. Now just reflect that in such a nation with straightforward minds and pure vision, if the Persian mentality finds opportunities for contaminating these, and then they also come with a specific objective, it is obvious what will then be the outcome. The simple minds of Muslims could not compete with the trickeries of their intellect. These people became integrated within the habitations of Muslims, where they began to insidiously spread their own ideas. History informs us that the name of the very first individual among Muslims who initiated the issue of Taqdeer was Mobid bin Khalid Yahani, and tells us that he had taken this issue from Abu Yunus, who was connected to the Asawara. This belief was taken forward from Mobid by Gilan Damashqi and spread further. According to this belief, man is declared to be merely a constrained being and trapped in the chains of a predestined kismat. From this respect this group is called Jabriya. 9.10 Christian influences. The doctrine of Jabr was also the foundation of Christianity. This belief that a human child is born with sin, and that no deed of man can erase the mark of this initial sin is absolute Jabr. Then, according to the Bible, Isa had said this prayer in the last moments of his life that, "O God, your will is to be met, not mine." This was the foundation of the belief to be content with the will of God. Thus, according to a narration from history, Gilan Damashqi, who was from the Qubti tribe, had taken this doctrine of Jabr from a Christian, who had become a Muslim and later reverted again to Christianity. The doctrine of the duality of Khair and Shar also existed among Jews. When Bani Israel chanced to live around the area under the rule of Khosrow 108 during the hegemony of Babylon, their intermingling with the Persians was a necessity. 9.11 The Jewish influences. After this, their release from Babylon and rehabilitation in their former homeland was also owing to the kindliness of the Akhazara of Persia. Due to this, they became even more influenced by the Zoroastrians. The doctrine of the duality of Khair and Shar was introduced among them in this manner, and their interest in metaphysical ontological issues added further polish to it. The Jewish Institute of Ontology in Alexandria was the center of philosophy in this era. Hence, one report from history is also that the founder of the doctrine of Jabr was Ja'ad bin Durham, who, though he was himself a Muslim, had taken this belief from a Jew in Syria. From Durham this doctrine was learned by Yam bin Safwan, who was from Khorasan. He disseminated this belief with such fervor and intensity that the name of the sect of Jabriya itself became Yamiya. Thus this sect is known in history by this name. In our annals not only is there this kind of ambiguity about the inventor of this doctrine, but also uncertainty about the process itself of the introduction of this belief. Therefore, sometimes this sect is called Jabriya because they used to emphasize that Allah is omnipotent, and sometimes it is called Qadriya because they rejected man's ability to make choices. Details of this issue will appear later. Among Muslims, whether the inventor of this doctrine is Mobit or Yam, or its source is Zoroastrianism, or Judaism and Christianity, this reality is clear that this totally non-Quranic belief infiltrated Islam from non-Islamic sources. This is an occurrence dating from the initial period of the Abbasid era. At this point, the question which surely arises in our minds is, how did this kind of non-Quranic belief, which relates to the fundamentals of deen, become widespread among Muslims? It is certain that those communicating and disseminating it would have presented philosophical reasonings in its support, but the mind finds it hard to acknowledge that Muslims of that era, at least, became ready to accept this kind of belief as part of their deen merely on the basis of philosophical reasonings. In the matter of deen they must have been demanding the authority of deen itself, and the authority of deen was supplied to them. 9.12 The authority of deen for this non-Quranic doctrine. You will have been taken aback to hear how this could have occurred. How did this happen? This tale is also very strange and instructive. From this not only was authority for this one belief, Taqdeer, received, to whatever extent contamination by non-Quranic concepts occurred in deen, their basis was also on this same authority. 9.12.1 A Hadith. Allah had declared his book, the Quran, to be the foundation of deen, and Rasulullah himself used to follow it and present its teachings. Until the time that the Quran remained as the foundation of deen, no contamination from a non-Islamic belief was able to take place in Islam. The contaminators of deen first of all removed this foundation from its position, and made this belief commonplace that in deen the authority and final verdict is not the Quran alone. Together with the Quran there is another thing similar to it, misluhu ma'ahu, and those are ahadith. Initially all that was proclaimed about the ahadith was that the Quran becomes further elucidated from these. After this, they advanced forward another step. Among the Jews there was this belief that the wahi received by a nabi from Allah consists of two types. One is Torah Shab Kitab, that is wahi jali or wahi makshub, and the other is Torah Shab Alpha, that is wahi kafi or wahi ger makshub. Wahi makshub is recorded in the Book of Moses, and wahi ger makshub consists of those narrations via Harun which are prevalent among the nation. The whole edifice of the Shariat of Jews is dependent on these very narrations. The Quran has only described one kind of wahi, all of which is preserved within its folds. But now this belief was made commonplace among Muslims that even the wahi which Rasulullah received from the direction of Allah was of two types. One was wahi makshub or wahi matlu, which is documented in the Quran, and the other was wahi ger makshub or wahi ger matlu, whose compilations are these narrations. These are what are called a hadith. Both of these are from the direction of Allah and are the equivalent of each other. Subsequently, this belief was concocted that if a mutual contradiction is found between two concepts or commands presented by wahi, then out of these two, one is to be considered as the canceller, nazik, and the other is to be taken as being cancelled, mansukh. As a logical conclusion of this belief, it was said that if a contradiction is found between the Quran and a hadith, then it should be understood that the hadith has cancelled the command of the Quran, that is, a hadith became declared to be the cancellers of the Quran. In other words, a hadith became declared to be the authority and criteria in deen, and the Quran became relegated to the earning of sawab through its recitation. Rasulullah had not given any compilation of his own hadith to the Ummah. Rasulullah had only given the Quran, in a compiled and complete form, to the Ummah, which exists among us, word for word. After Rasulullah, the righteous caliphs, Khulafa Rashidin, and even other distinguished companions did not compile any collection of a hadith. Abu Bakr Siddiq and Umar Farooq had even strictly prohibited the writing and narrating of a hadith so that no contamination could take place in deen. But when the belief mentioned above was concocted about a hadith, then the need arose for the compilation of collections of a hadith. Thus the collection of a hadith which is declared to be the most correct, that is the compilation of Imam Bukhari, was compiled in the 3rd century Hijri. Imam Bukhari died in 256 AH. The remainder of the collections were compiled after him. Only the collection of Imam Malik Muwatta was compiled before this, but it contained very few ahadith. All these collections of ahadith were not compiled through any prior existing written record. They were compiled from hearsay through people. Just ponder that 250 years after the death of Rasulullah, those ahadith which will be compiled based on merely the verbal utterances of people, what will be their scholarly and historical status? Leaving aside their status in deen. But these ahadith, which were, at the most, attributed to Rasulullah, that is those who were verbally narrating them only attributed them to Rasulullah, were proclaimed as being the most accurate ahadith of Rasulullah, and it was decreed that kufr will necessarily become applied from the rejection of even one of them. In this way, leaving aside the possibility of the error and omission which can be made by the narrators of these ahadith, just ponder on the allowance and leeway which emerged for the concoction of false ahadith, and relating these to Rasulullah. How far and wide these concocted ahadith were disseminated can be assessed from just one thing that Imam Bukhari has written. That when he began the task of collecting ahadith, he found 600,000 ahadith. Out of these, he considered about 7,000 to be worthy of being included in his collection. The remainder, almost 593,000 narrations, were rejected by him. The authority for the accuracy of those ahadith that he included in his compilation was also his personal vision and assessment. These did not possess the confirmation and approval of Rasulullah himself. 9.12.2 Ahadith in support of the doctrine of Jabr. You will certainly be astounded how collections of narrations based on such weak criteria were accepted as a hadith of Rasulullah. Its basis was sentimental, that is, the Ummah has unparalleled love for the eminent being of Rasulullah. And it should be so, provided it is kept within the limits of the Quran. Its consequence is that whatever entity or matter is related to Rasulullah, the Ummah raises it high above their eyes. These narrations are, at any rate, alleged to be the eminent sayings of Rasulullah. Our condition is such that in many places in the world certain stones are preserved on which footprints are imprinted. It is renowned about these that they are the prints of the sacred feet of Rasulullah. People go there in droves and prostrate before these stones as well. This was that very sentiment which was exploited by those who were concocting fraudulent narrations. And by relating whatever came to their minds towards the messenger, they kept spreading it among the Ummah as being the ahadith of Rasulullah. This was that door through which non-Islamic ideologies and beliefs kept becoming a part of deen. What kinds of ahadith were fabricated about the issue of Taqdeer can be estimated from a few examples which we will present from the chapter on Taqdeer. Bab-ul-Taqdeer. From Mishkat, which is considered to be a very trustworthy compilation of ahadith. 1. It is narrated from Abdullah bin Umar that Rasulullah said that 50,000 years before Allah created the heavens and the earth, He wrote down the taqdeers of the creations at the time that His arsh was on water. 2. Ibn Umar narrates that Rasulullah said that everything depends on taqdeer, so much so, that even insanity and wisdom. 3. It is quoted from Hazrat Ali that Rasulullah said that there is not a single individual among you whose final abode has not been written down, that is, his abode will either be the fire or in paradise. 4. Abu Hurairah narrates that Rasulullah said that however much Allah has written down in relation to zina, adultery and fornication, in the taqdeer of a man, he will definitely act on this. Furthermore, Rasulullah said that Allah created Adam, then rubbed his right hand on his back, Then from this, that is, from the back of Adam, he drew out his progeny and announced that I created these for paradise, they will do paradisiacal deeds. Then he rubbed his hand again on the back of Adam and took out more progeny from him, and then announced that I have created these for hell, these people will perform deeds leading to hell. Having listened to this from Rasulullah, an individual inquired, O Rasulullah, then what is the point of doing deeds? In reply, Rasulullah said that when Allah creates some individual for paradise, He gets him to carry out tasks that are for the inhabitants of paradise. And as a result of these deeds Allah makes him enter paradise. In the same way, when He creates some individual for hell, then He gets him to enact deeds which are for those meant for hell. And due to his deeds, Allah places him in hell. 5. Abdullah bin Umar narrates that on one occasion Rasulullah came outside, and there were 2 books in his hands. Addressing us he said, Do you know what these 2 books are? We replied that, O Rasulullah, we do not know. He pointed to his right hand and said that this book is from the Rabb of the universe, the names of those people destined for paradise are in it. Now nothing can be deducted from it, nor added to it. Next, pointing to the book in his left hand, he said that this book is also from the Rabb of the universe. The names of those who are destined for hell are recorded in it, now nothing can be added to it or deducted from it. 6. It is narrated from Abu al-Darda that Rasulullah said that Allah has made himself free from 5 things regarding every one of his servants, that is, He has written these 5 things into his Taqdeer. His lifespan, age, his good and bad deeds, his place of abode, his return, and rizq. Sustenance. 9.12.3 A ban on discussion and analysis about them. These kinds of innumerable narrations are quoted in these books of a hadith. It is obvious that whichever individual ponders on these narrations in the light of the Quran using knowledge and vision, all types of doubts and misgivings about them will surface in his heart, and he will raise objections to them, and will also ask questions for further clarification. The people who had concocted these ahadith had also made an arrangement in advance in order to save themselves from such an eventuality. Hence, they had concocted the following kinds of ahadith alongside them. For example, Abu Hurairah narrates that we were sitting discussing the issue of Taqdeer when Rasulullah arrived, and on hearing our conversation, his face turned red. It became so red that it looked as if the juice of pomegranate seeds had been squeezed onto his cheeks. Then he said, Is this the command which was given to you? Have I been sent among you for this? When nations who came before you disputed on this issue, they were annihilated. I give you this oath and repeat this oath, that you should never again argue about this issue and do not engage in any debate or disputation about it. Have you seen how this has been forestalled by those concocting narrations about Taqdeer against the Quran? They declared that Rasulullah has said that those ahadith which are narrated to you about Taqdeer, you should accept them with eyes shut, whichever individual enters into any kind of discussion or analysis about them, he will be annihilated. After shutting the door of critique and objections to these concocted narrations, these people went a step further, and this situation again merits deep reflection. 9.13 Metaphoric and established verses. Some realities in the Quran are explained using allegories. These are called metaphorical verses. They can be understood by men of knowledge and vision according to their own intelligence, and this kind of difference in comprehension makes no difference to actual deen. For example, it is noted in the Quran about Allah that He became established on the throne. Arsh. 10:3. Some have taken the meaning of Arsh literally and have said that there is a real throne in the heavens on which Allah is seated. Others, by taking the metaphorical meaning, have said that this means that Allah has authority, supremacy, and control over the entire universe. Arguments can be presented for and against each of these 2 interpretations. but it is obvious that there is no effect on the iman of an individual due to this difference, that is, that if it is accepted in one way, then a man can be declared a mu'min. And if it is accepted the other way, then he will become a kafir. But some matters are such that they have to be accepted in principle in the same way as they are noted in the Quran. For example, it is stated in the Quran that, say, that Allah is one. 112. 1. Acknowledging that Allah is one is related to actual deen. There is no allowance in this, that if one individual wishes he can accept Allah as being one, and if another wishes, Allah forbid, he can acknowledge two or three. Acknowledging that Allah is one is iman, and acknowledging more than one is kufr. 9.14 Constituents of iman. The Quran has made it clear by accepting what things a person can be a Muslim, and by rejecting what things he becomes a kafir. These are called the constituents of iman, and they are 5, that is, to have iman in Allah, the hereafter, the malaika, the book and the anbiya. 2. 177. At another place it is stated, any who denied Allah, His malaika, His books, His messengers, and the hereafter, has gone far astray. 4. 136. In the whole of the Quran only these 5 constituents of iman have been noted, but do you know that in order to now acknowledge someone to be a Muslim, what kind of acceptance is demanded from him? He is told to declare. And you may also have been told this: I have accepted iman in Allah, in His malaika, in His books, in His messengers, on resurrection after death, and on this matter that virtue and evil, wrong and good, benefit and loss, care and shar, all have been preordained. Muqaddar. By Allah. 9.14.1 Addition of a 6th constituent, iman in Taqdeer. In other words, 5 constituents of iman were defined by Allah, but now a 6th constituent was added into it, that is, the addition of iman in Taqdeer. Now no individual can become a Muslim until the time that, apart from Allah, the malaika, the books, the messengers, and the hereafter, he also professes iman in Taqdeer. And this addition occurred as a result of a hadith. For example, 1. It is narrated from Hazrat Ali that Rasulullah said that no man can become a mu'min until he has belief in these 4 things. A. To be a witness that no one is to be worshipped other than Allah, and that I am the messenger of Allah, I have been sent as hacked by Allah. B. To accept death as hacked. C. To accept resurrection after death as being true. D. And to have iman in Taqdeer. 2. Ibn Welmi narrates that when Abi ibn Ka'b came to me, I told him that some misgivings have arisen in my heart about Taqdeer. Narrate some hadith to me, so that by listening to it perchance my unease may be eliminated. He said that if Allah grips those living in the heavens and the earth in punishment, then He will not be one who does any kind of injustice to them. And if He has mercy on them, then His rahmat will, in any case, be better and more superior than their deeds. If you spend gold equivalent to the size of the mountain of Uhud in the path of Allah, then this good deed of yours will not be acceptable to Allah until the time that you have total iman in Taqdeer. And you fully comprehend this point, that whatever has come to you, it was not going to be hindered and was not going to err. That is, you were meant to face it. And that thing which was not meant to reach you, it would never have reached you. That is, whatever you have achieved, it was not due to your own efforts but was destined to be like this in your muqaddar. And whatever thing you did not receive, you would not have achieved it despite your efforts, because this was the way the Taqdeer of Allah was meant to be. If you hold a belief contrary to this belief, that is, your belief in the Taqdeer of Allah is not absolute, and you die in this condition, then you will most definitely be consigned to hell. Ibn Welmi narrates that having heard this testimony from Abi ibn Ka'b, I went immediately to Abdullah ibn Masud. He also said the same. Then I went to Hadifa bin Alaman, he also said the same. Then I went to Zayd ibn Sabit, he also narrated a similar kind of hadith from Rasulullah. 9.14.2 Elucidation by Syed Suleiman Nadwi. In this way the ideology of Taqdeer, which was borrowed from Zoroastrians, Christians, and Jews, became a constituent of Iman among us. The degree of importance which this ideology has acquired among our religious class can be estimated from this, that the late Syed Suleiman Nadwi has published a series of volumes on Sirat an-Nabi, biography of Rasool, in which he has discussed beliefs in the fourth volume of the series. In relation to this, after discussing Allah, the Malaika, the books, the messengers, and the hereafter, he has added a chapter on Qada and Qadr, fate and scales. In its own right, he begins it in this way. Though this is not mentioned anywhere in the Quran in relation to Iman, it has been reiterated so many times in the Quran that its importance demands that it is also given a place in the aspects of Iman. Therefore, in some hadith which are correct, this is declared to be the final link in Imaniyat. What the practical consequences are of making some ideology a part of Iman, you cannot estimate this today. It can be estimated at that time when power is in the hands of the religious class. The fatwa of these holy ones is that whichever Muslim is a denier of any one of the constituents of Iman, that is, he does not accept it in the way in which these holy ones demand, he becomes a murtad, apostate. And the punishment for apostasy is execution. Thus the degree to which Muslim blood became so cheap in relation to this issue of Taqdeer during the era in which our religious clergy was in power, and the killing and mayhem which was unleashed to suppress this fitna of irtidad, the soul shivers at the thought of it. 9.15 The voice of protest against it. At this juncture, this question must be repeatedly arising in your mind: that was there no voice of protest raised against this from any corner of the Ummah when this kind of ideology against the Quran was being widely disseminated? Did such people no longer exist among Muslims who could refute this Ajmi concept by presenting the viewpoint of the Quran? Such people did exist, and they also raised their voice against this with full force. The reasonings presented by them were that 1. In Deen the authority and criterion is the Book of Allah, the Quran, which can be understood through intellect and reasoning, and knowledge, and vision. 2. The law of requital is among the fundamental principles of the Quran. According to this, man himself is responsible for his own deeds and is accountable for their good or bad consequences. The process of righteous guidance, the messengers and the book, and reward and punishment, the hereafter, are all for this purpose. If it is presumed about man that he is constrained, that is, that he is not responsible for his deeds, then no further need remains for any of these. Inanimate objects, plants, and animals are constrained, no Nabi was sent to them, nor can they be given any reward and punishment. 9.16 Just sticking on a label is sufficient. At this you may inquire what was the response to these reasonings from the supporters of the doctrine of Jabr. They responded merely for the sake of argument. And the reply was those same hadith from which a few have already been quoted. But in actual fact these people never need to respond logically to any reasonings, that is why their technique for this is totally different. The opponent whose reasonings they cannot rebut, they invent a label for him, and then with sustained propaganda they make this label so offensive that to whomever it is applied, the populace, without thinking or understanding, goes after them in a hysterical frenzy. Leaving aside tales of the past, in our own era Sir Syed Ahmad Khan made certain comments with which the orthodox faction differed. Instead of these people responding to his objections with reasonings, they invented a label against him. 9.16.1 The label against Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Sir Syed had said that the secret of the progress of the nations of the West is that they have harnessed the forces of nature, and are obtaining all kinds of benefits from them. We cannot compete with these nations in the arena of life until we, too, do not acquire education regarding natural science. These people latched onto the word nature and spread it about that Sir Syed was naturey. And then they embellish naturey with such meanings that this label became synonymous with atheist, apostate, and non-deen. Whatever Sir Syed used to say, it was declared in response that this individual is naturey, that no one should listen to his utterances, otherwise he too will become naturey. And no one bothered to even question that. Sir, who is it that is called a naturey, and what is wrong with this? This is the technique for branding with labels. In relation to this, you may also have heard that famous story about a Baniya Hindu who used to live in a village in a frontier province. The mullah of the village became annoyed with him over some matter, and going to the mosque, he made an announcement that, "O people, do you know that the Baniya of your village has become a Wahhabi?" On hearing this, the inhabitants of that village rose up against this Wahhabi, and until he went and apologized to this mullah, that is, said to him that I am not a Wahhabi but a Hindu, they did not stop pursuing him. This is called inventing labels. Proponents of the ideology of Taqdeer had also invented similar kinds of labels against their opponents. Sometimes they were called Mu'tazila, sometimes Qadriya. Then these kinds of a hadith were concocted about Qadriya that Rasulullah had declared about the Qadriya that they are magus for the Ummah. It becomes obvious now that whichever individual or sect is declared to be a magus, what doubt remains in his being eligible to be killed due to being an apostate? By reflecting closely, this reality will become apparent that this is a fabricated hadith and merely a creation of propaganda. Because during the era of Rasulullah, neither discussions on Jabr and Qadr were touched upon, nor was there the existence of any sect in the Ummah. But in an environment contaminated by propaganda, who is going to reflect on these matters? In any event, not only were those presenting the Quranic concept of Taqdeer imprisoned and sent to the gallows by proclaiming them to be murtad. Another tyranny added to this was that their writings were sought and consigned to fire, and in this way, humanity became deprived of an immense treasure of knowledge and literature. Though Mu'tazila or Qadriya disappeared in this way, afterwards this technique became customary, that the moment anyone said anything based on intellect and reasoning, the label of Ejaz was applied to him from the court of the religious clergy. The consequence of this is obvious. In this way, the torches of reasoning and the beacons of intellect kept being extinguished. Thus Sir Syed was also declared to be a Mu'tazila, and the charge in the fatwa of kufr which was levelled against me too by 1,000 ulama, holy scholars, was also that there are germs of Ejaz to be found in the ideas of this individual, that is, he says things based on intellect and reasoning. It is obvious that in the court of the clerics what greater crime can there be than this? In any case, this was the outcome of raising a voice against the ideology of Taqdeer. 9.17 Quranic verses in support of the issue of Jabr. In connection with this discourse, these kinds of verses of the Quran were also presented by supporters of this doctrine of Jabr, in which, for example, it is stated that and which is translated as Allah misguides whomsoever He wishes, and gives guidance to whomsoever He wishes. 16:93. And
فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء.
He forgives whoever He wishes, and gives punishment to whoever He wishes. 284. In the coming chapters we will endeavor to present the correct meanings of these kinds of verses. It should be made clear that even if these verses had not been presented by the supporters of the doctrine of Jabr, even then it was essential that their correct meaning should be brought before us, because without this the issue of Taqdeer cannot be truly understood. 9.18 A fundamental principle in comprehending the Quran. But before we approach these verses of the Quran, we need to understand a few points of principle as an introduction in relation to comprehending the Quran. In the first place, that the Quran has also presented one proof of its being from the direction of Allah, the fact that there is no contradictory matter in it. Do these people not reflect in the Quran, that if it had been from someone other than Allah, then these people would have found many contradictions in it. 482. Therefore the first thing to bear in mind is that no contradictory statements will be found in the whole of the Quran. In other words, it will never happen that at one place it will state that whoever wishes can adopt the straight path, and whoever wishes can become misguided. And state at another place that you cannot adopt any path of your choice. Whoever we wish, we can put him on the right path, and whoever we wish, we can misguide him. The second point is that if such verses are found in the Quran in which there appears to be a contradiction from a superficial glance, then these should neither be viewed with a cursory glance, nor should we move on with eyes closed. For this purpose the Quran has laid down the condition of cogitation. By concerted thought and reasoning in these verses, their real meaning becomes apparent to us and no further contradiction remains. For deliberation on the Quran, it is essential to keep two important points in mind. Firstly, to comprehend any one verse of the Quran, it is necessary that wherever all the verses about this topic are dispersed throughout the Quran, these should be kept before us. In this way, the correct meaning of the Quran appears perspicuously before us. It is the proclamation of the Quran that it makes its meanings clear through tasrif al-ayat, that is, by presenting verses repeatedly. This is an intrinsic condition for comprehension of the Quran. And the second point is that no meaning of a verse of the Quran can be accepted as being correct which is contrary to the entirety of its teaching. For example, the sum total of the teaching of the Quran is that Allah is one and has no partner. Allah is called Al-Khaliq, the one who creates, in the Quran, and at another place he is called Ahsan al-Khaliqin, that is, among those who create, he is the one who creates the most beautiful and balanced creation. 23:14. From this verse it is clear that the Quran also acknowledges other creators besides Allah, which is why it has declared him to be the most balanced of creators. From this, seemingly, an aspect of shirk is perceived. This contradiction becomes eliminated by bringing before us other verses of the Quran. It has stated about Allah that He is such a creator who brought the universe and the earth into existence from nothing. 12:101. No one else can be like this. Hence, the difference between Allah being Khaliq and man being Khaliq is that Allah brings things of the universe into existence from nothingness. Whereas man can only do this much, that he can create different kinds of things from whatever ingredients already exist. From this, neither an iota of doubt about shirk remains, nor is there any contradiction between these two verses. 23:14 and 12:101. This is the correct method to study the Quran. In keeping with this, in the coming chapters we will present those verses which in general terms are called verses of Mashiach, that is, verses containing Ma Yashu, Ma in Yashe, Lao Sha Allah, I seek the guidance of Allah in this regard. But in this connection, too, it is essential to understand one important point. These kinds of phrases will frequently appear before you in the coming pages about these verses, that this is the meaning generally taken of this verse, or the prevalent translation of this verse is this, but in reality its meaning is like this. From general meaning or prevalent meaning it does not signify that this is the way it is known among the general population. These meanings are given in our books of tafsir which have been authored by our scholars, and the translations of the Quran are not done by those who are illiterate either. At this point too, the question will again arise in your heart that why did the Mufassirin give such an explanation, and how did these come to be translated in such a way? This question also merits attention. 9.18.1 Tafsir of the Quran. The way that our first history was compiled by Imam Tabari around the 4th century A.H. Similarly, it was also he who wrote our very first voluminous Tafsir al-Quran. In this tafsir he quoted a hadith in explanation of every verse, and in this way embedded this idea that the explanation is not his own or that of some other scholar, but is the tafsir propounded by Rasulullah himself. Now it is obvious that a tafsir about which it is asserted that this is the statement of Rasulullah, which Muslim could reject it, or have the audacity and courage to say that Allah forbid. This tafsir is not correct, that the tafsir described by me is correct. Hence, following this, all the tafsir which have been written up until today are based on the tafsir of Imam Tabari. If anyone has differed in this, then it is only to the extent of saying that such and such a hadith quoted by Imam Tabari is weak, in its place this other hadith is the correct one, that is, the tafsir is still done on the basis of a hadith. After this, when it was the turn of translations, then it is obvious that this issue was ensured that the words of the translation should not be different from those of this tafsir which is continuing to be inherited from the past in line with a hadith. Together with a hadith, this belief also continues to be handed down among us that to differ even slightly from the path of forefathers is a cause for great sin. If it had been adjudged about a hadith that these are not definitely and unquestionably the sayings of Rasulullah, rather are those words and actions which are attributed to him, and that forefathers were also, in any case, only human beings like us, then a different meaning could have been taken of the verses of the Quran from these tafsir in the light of knowledge and vision, and reasoning, and evidence. The outcome of not perceiving it like this was that comprehension of the Quran literally came to a standstill. If exposition of the Quran had been done from the Quran itself, and it was interpreted in the light of human knowledge in our own respective eras, then the complexion of these tafsir of the Quran would have been something entirely different. I have tried to comprehend the Quran in this very way and have defined the meanings of its verses in the same way. And as far as translation is concerned, as has been clarified in the preface of this book, translation of the Quran cannot be done in any language of the world. Synonyms for the Quranic words cannot be found in any language. This is why although an exposition mafhum of the Quran can be done, it cannot be translated. Its meanings cannot be truly understood through the words of a translation. This is the reason why, instead of doing a translation of the Quran, I have compiled a mafhum. It is this mafhum which will appear before you in the coming pages, and its authority will be the Quranic verses themselves.